That blind girl has been sitting alone for 90 minutes, and no one dares go near her because her mother is Aurora Quinn. The scent of premium Guatemalan coffee mingled with the soft clinking of silverware against porcelain, forming a refined but soulless soundtrack at Hollow and Ember, a cafe that welcomed designer handbags and Harvard-trained smiles more than human warmth. In a shadowed corner, a little girl, around 10, sat by herself. Her eyes hidden behind dark glasses, her tiny hands searched the table for something no one had bothered to notice, a braille menu that should have been there. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against a flower vase. She tried to adjust it, but knocked it over instead. Water spilled, petals scattered, her dress soaked. No one moved, not because they didn't see, but because they knew she was the daughter of Aurora Quinn, the most ruthless CEO in tech, a woman who could end a career with a single email. Hollow and Ember sat in the heart of Chicago's elite financial district, where top-tier professionals spoke polite but hollow words, and management valued not doing anything wrong more than doing the right thing. Behind the counter, Malika Brooks wiped the marble bar for the 10th time that hour. The wall clock read 4:37 p.m. The girl had been there since 3. Malika glanced at Kevin, the bald white manager glued to his phone, completely indifferent. For 90 minutes, no one dared serve the girl. No one offered sympathy. Everyone knew Aurora Quinn did not tolerate anyone approaching her daughter without explicit permission. Why? No one dared ask. Hollow and Ember served power, not people. Malika Brooks, 27 years old, black, dreadlocks tied neatly, tall, strong build, eyes that were both unwavering and distant. Something about her warned others not to underestimate her, even if she wore an apron. She had once studied psychology. She'd wanted to become a behavioral analyst. But when her little brother Zion lost his vision due to a medical error at age 11, Malika dropped out. She juggled 3 jobs to support him, pay hospital bills, and eventually enroll him in the state's only blind academy. She didn't need sympathy. She needed survival, and to keep her dignity from being sold cheaper than a sugar packet in this cafe. "Anyone taking table 4 yet?" Malika asked Kevin quietly. "Don't touch it, VIP," Kevin muttered, eyes still locked on his screen. "That girl's shivering. Her dress is soaked. No one's approached her for almost 2 hours. Look at her." Kevin looked up, scowling. "Malika, do I need to remind you that you're still on probation? Do you even know who that is?" "That's Aurora Quinn. You touch her daughter without permission. You take me down with you." Malika looked him straight in the eye. "That's not a customer. That's a blind child left alone in a room full of adults who don't give a damn." Kevin stepped closer, voice low and tight. "You really want to get fired for offending the most feared CEO in America?" Malika didn't respond. Instead, she stepped out from behind the counter, walking across a silence thick as ice toward table 4. Her footsteps echoed like thunder. She bent down gently. "Hi there. My name's Malika. Do you need anything?" The little girl turned her head. "Have you seen my mom?" "Haven't yet, but I'm here. Would you like some hot cocoa while you wait?" A second later, the girl smiled faintly. Malika had just broken the unspoken rule and sparked a war with a woman who could move markets with a single tap. Malika returned to the counter and made the cocoa herself, adding a few delicate cookies from the display tray. She placed them on a small serving dish, murmuring to herself, "Led with scent. Gentle hands. Speak softly. Don't scare her." When she came back, Eliza was still sitting upright, hands folded neatly in her damp lap. Though her eyes were hidden behind dark lenses, Malika could feel the child's imaginary gaze, as if she was tracking every movement through sound and silence. You once called power a cold storm, but the very next morning that sky invited you into its eye. The laptop screen glowed faintly under the yellowing kitchen light. The words, "Meeting 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." Sat there, silent like a threat, but also like a sign, no signature, no explanation, just an address, Quintech headquarters, Chicago Loop. Malika sipped ice-cold water, but her throat remained dry. Since stepping into the orbit of those who say little but shape the fate of others, this was the first time power had extended what felt like an invitation, as if it were waiting on her response. She didn't sleep, didn't breathe evenly, but she wasn't afraid. By 6 a.m., she was ready, not with armor, but with the resolve of someone who had shelved her own dreams to raise a younger brother in darkness. Someone who understood. True power doesn't lie in the invitation. It lies in how you walk through the door. Chicago never sleeps, but this morning it leaned visibly toward one tower, Quintech. The top floor had no glass windows, only an invisible wall made of fear, rumor, and absolute control. Malika walked into the grand lobby wearing borrowed shoes, a secondhand dress pressed with a damp towel, and dreadlocks tied back with an old elastic, the outfit of quiet preparation. She was surrounded by a forest of tailored suits, Rolex watches, Italian leather, and smiles sharpened at Ivy League finishing schools. No one looked at her like a candidate. They looked at her like a mistake. The receptionist froze at her name. One call. 10 seconds later, a woman in a black suit appeared. "Ms. Brooks, follow me." The voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't condescending either. It was mechanical precision. The elevator lit up for the 45th floor. No one spoke. Only the cold hum of metal echoed, guiding Malika toward the heart of a world people like her usually only read about in news headlines. Aurora Quinn, age 47, the embodiment of success with frostbite, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire, once publicly criticized for not shedding a single tear while laying off 800 employees via Zoom. Eyes pale and calculating, voice never above calm. Hair platinum blonde, pinned back like a steel crown. To investors, she was the ice queen. To her employees, she was the ruler of the unspoken code. Silence is survival. Aurora didn't care if she was loved or hated. She cared that everything went according to plan. And Eliza, her blind daughter, what was never outside the plan. But yesterday, someone broke the script. A black woman, no power, no credentials, no permission, dared to touch the most forbidden thing in Aurora's world, her daughter's real emotions. Aurora didn't summon Malika to chat. She summoned her to confirm a theory. The meeting room on the 45th floor had no windows. Walls wrapped in cool ash-gray leather. One painting hung in the center, abstract with blue and black strokes that twisted like a maze. Aurora stood with her back turned, teacup in hand, eyes on the emptiness ahead. "Do you know why I left Eliza alone for almost 2 hours?" she asked without turning around. Malika sat upright. "No, ma'am. Because I wanted to see who would dare approach." Aurora turned. Her gaze wasn't piercing, but glassy cold. 17 people walked by. No one stopped. You were the only one." Malika frowned. "She's your daughter, not a test." "But you passed," Aurora interrupted. "You passed the test, passed the standards I engineered into that space. That makes me curious." "You call kindness a test?" Malika rose to her feet. "I didn't come here to earn points." Aurora set her tea down. Her eyes flickered. "Good. I don't need followers. I need those who think differently." Malika gripped her bag strap. In that moment, two women, one powerful, one dismissed, stared at each other without words. But a silent negotiation had begun. Aurora pulled a check from her file folder. Watermarked signature, a number too long to absorb in one heartbeat, enough to shake anyone juggling 3 jobs and a pile of overdue bills. "This is compensation for your job loss," Aurora said as if reporting the weather. Malika looked at the check, then slowly slid it back forward. "No, thank you." Aurora raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Most people in your situation would need it." Malika didn't blink. Most people in my situation don't need to sell themselves to feel worthy. A pause. Then Aurora smiled, not joyfully, but like someone who'd just found a wild card. Very well, she said, closing that folder and opening another. Then I have a different offer. You will no longer serve coffee. You will accompany my daughter. Malika frowned. Accompany? A friend, a guide, someone to help Eliza feel like a regular child. It's paid. It comes with a contract. And it affects the future of the brother you love enough to give up college for. Malika's heart froze. You investigated me? Aurora didn't blink. I don't call it investigation. I call it preparation. I know you studied psychology at Morehouse. I know you dropped out in your final year to support your brother. I know Zion is a piano prodigy, and I know Wellington Academy's tuition is unreachable on your income. Malika stood. You're blackmailing me. Aurora crossed her arms. I'm making an offer. You are free to decline. Malika gave a shaky laugh, her voice trembling with anger. You use your daughter as bait to test other people's morals. Now you're using my brother as leverage to buy my loyalty. You misunderstand, Aurora said softly. I'm buying integrity because my daughter needs it, and because I believe you're not the kind of person who would work for me just for money. You're right, Malika said, gripping her strap tighter. I won't work for you, but I'll do it for Eliza, if she wants it, and I'll do it on my terms. No reports, no supervision, no performance. Aurora stood still, unaccustomed to anyone speaking to her like that, but she nodded. Deal. The two women left the room with no handshake, no smile. Malika walked out with her back straight, never once looking back. She didn't need confirmation, didn't need a welcome. She hadn't come to be accepted. She came because a little girl needed someone to understand that blind does not mean invisible. At the front desk, a staff member handed Malika a temporary employee badge and a weekly schedule. She asked nothing, just tucked it quietly into her bag, like she was sheathing a sharp knife she might one day need. On the way out, her phone buzzed. Another email, from an unfamiliar address. Subject: Audition slot, Zion Brooks, Wellington Academy time. Friday, 2 p.m. She stopped in the lobby, took a long breath. Aurora had started to keep her promise, and that worried Malika more than any threat. Malika stepped out of Quintech. Morning sunlight caught the cold white steps beneath her. She paused. The tower loomed behind her like a warning. Inside there, the rules are not written for those who carry principles. But Malika hadn't come to play the game. She came to watch, to learn the rules, and to break them, if necessary. Her phone buzzed again. A text. Unknown number. Eliza says she wants to learn how to smell espresso tomorrow morning. Will you come? Malika closed her eyes. Let the sunlight warm her face. Then typed back a single word. Yes. The Quinn estate had no doorbell. The gates opened automatically when the car reached the white stone line, as if the house was built to know who deserved to enter. Malika stepped out, hand clenched around the strap of her worn fabric bag. Before her stood a 3-story neoclassical mansion, with floor-to-ceiling windows and hedges trimmed to the point of lifeless perfection. A white butler stepped out. No smile, no name, just a nod and a gesture to enter. The hallway was carpeted thick. Inside, the air was cold by design, as if all emotion had been sucked from the walls, leaving only silence and order. Eliza sat waiting in the small living room, white pleated dress, a braille book in hand, untouched. At the sound of footsteps, she tilted her head. Miss Malika? Her voice was soft, uncertain. I'm here, Malika replied, sitting down without touching her, letting presence bridge the distance. Today we're starting with a game. Smell and guess. I brought some very special things. Eliza nodded. Malika noticed the tiny curl of her fingers, a familiar reflex of defense. But within minutes, as the silk pouch of coffee beans was opened and Eliza leaned in to smell, The small muscles in her face began to relax. I know this smell. Cocoa? Malika smiled. Close. Arabica. No one interrupted the first lesson. Aurora never appeared. The staff moved silently past the door. There was an invisible force observing Malika from a distance, testing her every moment, but she didn't care. She wasn't here to be welcomed. She was here to observe, to listen, and to be the first person to ever ask Eliza, "How do you actually feel?" "Miss Malika, why does my mom only cry when she thinks I'm asleep?" The question came out of nowhere, just as Malika was guiding Eliza through the difference between espresso and Arabica, using a cloth pouch of coffee beans. No warning, no defense, no polite way to dodge it without betraying the little girl who had just begun to trust her. Malika froze for a few seconds, as if Eliza had just unlocked a door that the adults in this house had kept sealed shut for years, with silence and control. Eliza couldn't see Malika's expression, but she kept whispering, "I don't need eyes to hear. I hear Mom cry every night, but in the daytime, she has no feelings." "Like you have a real smile, Miss Malika, and my mom. She has another face. A fake one." No one taught Eliza to say that. And no one in this house had the courage to truly listen, except the one person here who didn't belong to the kingdom of masks, and because of that, could see what no one else could. Eliza's study room was on the east wing of the mansion's third floor, the sunniest part of the house, even if she couldn't see it. Malika had requested to move the room upstairs, citing a need for air and sunlight to support natural circadian rhythm. Aurora didn't object, but she didn't say a word either. The room was fitted with rounded furniture, braille panels, oak bookshelves, a recorder, and soft, non-slip carpets. But the most important thing wasn't any of that. It was the air. Since Malika arrived, the air had changed. Eliza laughed more. The staff walked lighter, and Aurora's late-night whispers no longer just vanished into nothingness. Malika recorded all these changes in a private notebook, not for reports, not to show Aurora, but to understand what was really happening in a house where everything was correct. But no one was truly living. Today was the day Zion came to visit. Malika met her brother at the gate. He stepped off the public bus with a sagging backpack, his red and white orientation cane in hand, and one Bluetooth earpiece in place. Zion, 16 years old, quiet, introspective, carrying the calm of someone who'd lived too long in a world without light. He didn't need to say much. When Malika reached out, he took her hand instantly and said softly, "I can tell you're tense. Your voice is 2 decibels higher than usual." Malika smiled, just a little tired. "You've been in that house for over a week now, and you haven't said a word about Mrs. Quinn because I still don't know what game I've stepped into." Zion nodded, then asked gently, "What about Eliza?" Malika paused. Her eyes caught a flicker of something deeper. "Eliza is the reason I'm still there." That afternoon, Malika brought Zion into Eliza's study. The little girl sat reading a braille book, her fingers dancing over the page like choreography. "Surprise visitor," Malika grinned. Eliza tilted her head. "Zion?" Zion chuckled. "Hey, princess." No one told Eliza who he was, but she clearly knew. Maybe Malika had mentioned her brother often. They began chatting easily, exchanging stories about using sound for spatial awareness and how heartbeats could steady the mind during chaos. But soon a knock echoed, not rushed, not loud, precise. Aurora entered. No greetings, no asking permission. Her gaze swept over all 3 of them. "Malika, I need you in the office. There are matters regarding Eliza's schedule next week." "We're in the middle of a session," Malika said, her tone even. "I won't repeat myself." Aurora turned. Malika glanced at Eliza. The little girl gripped the hem of her dress, head bowed slightly. "I'm okay," Eliza whispered before anyone could prompt her. Malika followed Aurora out, but deep inside, she understood. The battle in this house wasn't about power. It was about who had the courage to hear what no one else would admit. The office door closed softly behind Malika. No lock, but it might as well have been made of steel. Inside, the air was as cold as a corporate boardroom. Aurora sat behind her desk, tablet in hand, not looking up. The aromatherapy session for Wednesday afternoon will be canceled. Instead, I want you to increase Eliza's tactile reflex training. Add 1 extra hour each afternoon. Malika stood still. Aromatherapy helps calm her nerves. She sleeps better. I'm not asking what you think. Aurora cut in, eyes still on the screen. Silence filled the room like pressure in a sealed kettle. Malika inhaled slowly, no reaction, no resistance. She simply pulled out her small notebook and wrote down the changes. Anything else? She asked, voice steady. Aurora didn't answer immediately, but for a fleeting second as she glanced up, Malika caught it. Not anger, but fear. The fear of being replaced. Malika turned and walked away. If truth existed in this house, it didn't live in office memos. It lived where children hid secrets to protect the adults. Malika returned to the study room. Eliza sat calmly on the lounge bench, hugging her star-shaped pillow. Zion was beside her, alert. I'm fine, Eliza said before Malika could even ask. Miss Malika, I want to show you something. She beckoned her closer, then gently ran her hand along the edge of the piano. Trevor told me to only open this when I was ready, and I think today's the day. Malika looked at Eliza, then knelt beside the instrument. Her fingers traced the underside until they found a small wooden latch. Click. A hidden compartment popped open, inside an old leather notebook and a black USB stick with a handwritten note, "If Aurora won't speak the truth, let it speak for itself." T. Malika clutched the items. No need to ask if Eliza was sure. The girl was ready. Now it was her turn. That night in the dim basement staff lounge, Malika opened her personal laptop and plugged in the USB. Zion sat beside her, silent. The warm yellow light softened their faces, one of the rare comforting glows in a house wrapped in cold. The screen displayed a list of files, medical reports, scrubbed news articles, photos of sealed legal records, and finally, an internal voice recording. A man's voice, Trevor Quinn. I know you're lying. Clara didn't go blind by fate. It happened because Aurora was texting while driving. You paid off the media, bribed the hospital, and sealed the case within 48 hours. Malika dropped her forehead into her hand. That familiar wave surged. Bitterness, helplessness, and the righteous rage that once made her abandon pre-med in her senior year. What are you going to do? Zion asked. Malika looked up. Her eyes burned, lit from within. Call Trevor. If he had the courage to give this to Eliza, then he owes her something real. The call connected after 3 rings. Mr. Quinn? Malika said directly. This is Malika Brooks. I found the USB in Eliza's piano, and I think, you know why I'm calling. Trevor's voice dropped. You're inside Aurora's house? I haven't left, but I don't plan to stay if the truth keeps rotting beneath polished wood. A long pause. Then he said, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Lorraine Cafe, behind the Chicago Theater. Bring everything you found, and be ready to hear the rest. Malika hung up. Outside, the rain had begun, but inside her, nothing was cloudy anymore. It was time to drag the truth into the light, even if it meant digging up what an entire empire tried to bury alive. Aurora Quinn refused a treatment that could have restored her daughter's vision for 5 years. Malika wasn't sure if she'd heard right, or if her ears were rejecting the truth just spoken aloud by the only man in the Quinn family who still had a conscience. Trevor Quinn, Aurora's only brother, had just placed a thick, weighty file in front of her, a dossier powerful enough to collapse everything Aurora had built her legacy upon. You know what's worse than causing an accident that blinds your own child? Trevor said, his voice rough, like stones scraping beneath a fast current. It's having the chance to fix it and choosing not to. Malika opened the folder. Inside were stacks of medical reports, test results, letters from global research institutes, and most damning of all, formal refusal letters signed by Aurora Quinn herself. The reason for refusal? No guarantee of stable recovery. The truth was unmistakable. Aurora had chosen to let her daughter remain in the dark, to preserve control. Rain blurred the view outside the window. Trevor Quinn's office wasn't located at Quintech HQ, but instead sat atop an aging building in West Loop, where he ran a nonprofit organization supporting children with neurological trauma. The room was small, warm, scented with oak. It held everything Aurora's icy world did not. Children's scribbles framed on the walls, an upright piano in the corner, and a faded photo of three people, Aurora, Trevor, and Eliza, taken before the accident. Malika sat still, hand resting on the folder's cover, her heart spinning not with rage, but sorrow. Because sometimes the crime isn't in the accident, it's in how people choose to live afterward. You know, Trevor began, voice quiet. The day Eliza lost her sight, Aurora was gone from the hospital for nearly 40 hours. When she returned, she brought lawyers, not doctors. Trevor Quinn was unlike anyone else in the Quinn dynasty. Though Aurora's brother by blood, he'd renounced his inheritance at 28 after their mother died. He had once toured Europe as a professional pianist before founding his child trauma nonprofit. He lived modestly, avoided media, and was the only family member Eliza ever mentioned with a real smile. He was slightly hunched, his salt and pepper hair brushing the collar of his worn shirt. His voice was slow but firm, like every word had been carved in silence years ago. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it peeled back truths no one else dared touch. Malika realized, in a world where everyone spoke in contracts and clauses, Trevor was the only one who knew when to stay silent, and when silence became betrayal. Do you know why I didn't speak up earlier? Trevor asked, eyes steady. Malika didn't hesitate. Because you still hoped Aurora would change. Trevor gave a bitter smile. I used to believe my sister was just broken, that the trauma turned her cold so she could survive. But over time, I saw it clearly. Aurora isn't afraid of losing her daughter. She's afraid of losing control of the narrative. Malika clenched the folder. I need to get Eliza out of that control. She needs to know. She has a choice. Trevor shook his head. It won't be easy. Aurora's built a fortress. She employs only private doctors, trusts only her curated data. Every year she takes Eliza to the same clinic, one she funds, and every year the same result. No hope. Is there hope? Malika asked, almost whispering. Trevor pulled out another file. There's a new treatment, partial vision restoration, 60% success rate, but she's refused it 5 times. Malika didn't blink. Then we won't let a 6th time happen. That afternoon, Malika sat on bus 20, clutching the file folder Trevor had handed her. She stared out the window, but all she saw was misted rain and streaks of water sliding down the glass, like time melting away. Her chest didn't just burn with rage, it ached with quiet grief for Eliza, a little girl raised on unsaid pain, masked by appointments and reputation. She remembered Eliza's whisper, "If I could see again, would my mom still need me?" Malika knew Eliza didn't just need vision, she needed truth, even if it shattered the untouchable image she called mother. When Malika returned to the estate, Eliza was seated at the piano, her fingers tracing notes like mapping an unseen world. Malika sat beside her, silent. "Miss Malika," Eliza whispered, "are there things adults know, but never say out loud?" Malika placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, but sometimes, silence is the worst way to protect someone you love." Eliza asked nothing more, but her hand paused over the keys, suspended, like a note waiting to be played. The next morning, Aurora made an announcement. I'll be taking Eliza to a routine evaluation with her regular physician. No need for anyone to accompany us. Immediately, Malika's instincts flared. Quietly, she slipped a small tracking device into the lining of Eliza's backpack. One Zion had designed specifically for blind children needing independent assistance. No one noticed. 3 hours later, the tracker showed. The car didn't head toward the listed hospital. It veered into a remote suburban area, nearly 100 kilometers from the city. One name appeared on the map: Rosebridge Experimental Clinic. Malika called Trevor. His voice didn't waver. That's where she's taken Eliza for the past 5 years. Same doctors, same diagnosis, no hope. You're sure? Malika asked, barely breathing. I've been inside. They don't treat. They believe non-treatment is the only treatment. Malika gripped the phone. Then I won't let it happen again. Malika and Trevor reached Rosebridge an hour later. They parked a few hundred meters away, circling behind through an abandoned nursing facility. Through a side window, they saw Eliza sitting alone in the waiting room, hands clenched in her lap, her expression unnaturally calm. In the next room, Aurora argued with a doctor in a gray coat. Her voice was low, sharp. Her eyes flicked constantly between a file and a man beside her, the man Trevor identified in a whisper. Aurora's private lawyer. Malika saw it clearly now. Aurora was preparing yet another medical sentence to lock Eliza's future down for years more. She didn't wait. She pushed open the door. Every head turned. Aurora, she said evenly, I know everything. Aurora stood slowly, deliberately. What are you doing here? Malika didn't answer at first. She opened her bag and pulled out the file from Trevor. These are the 5 refusals you signed to reject treatment that could restore your daughter's vision. Here's the statement from an independent physician. And here, a recording from last year where you told your team to maintain the status quo of blindness. Aurora's face went pale. Eliza deserves to know, Malika said, her hand steady on the documents. Being her mother doesn't give you the right to bury the truth. She's lived in darkness, not because of the accident, but because of your decision. At that moment, Eliza appeared in the doorway. She couldn't see, but she had heard everything. I always knew, Eliza whispered. I just never understood why. Aurora staggered, as if the words hit her chest like a blow. Trevor stepped forward, catching his sister as she nearly collapsed into a chair. No one said a word, because truth had finally spoken its name. No one remembered how they left Rosebridge. After Eliza stood frozen at the threshold and whispered, I always knew. I just never understood why. No one said anything more. Aurora didn't argue, Trevor didn't scold, and Malika, she simply stood behind Eliza like a wall shielding wind. The very system built to protect the secret, shattered by a little girl brave enough to say it out loud. The car ride home was silent. Aurora sat in the front seat, her face turned toward the window, like staring into a mirror that no longer reflected anything. Eliza slept on Malika's shoulder, her hand still gripping the pouch that held her braille reader. That night, there was no rage, no excuses, only a short email, sent at 3:17 a.m. from Aurora's personal account, to both Trevor and Malika. All sessions, rescheduled, new doctor, full freedom of treatment options. If Eliza is ready, I won't stop her. A. Just one signature, but for the first time in Eliza's life, no one was telling her to be quiet. And as dawn broke, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Quinn estate. Eliza slowly turned and reached toward the light. Miss Malika, this morning I saw something orange. Malika held her breath. Trevor froze. Aurora said nothing. She sat by the window, gripping the armrest until her knuckles turned pale. eyes locked on her daughter's outstretched finger, pointing toward brightness she'd never seen before. "Are you sure?" Malika whispered, afraid to break the fragile moment. Eliza smiled, a trembling, radiant smile. "Not sure, but it's different. Like sound has shape, like afternoon, knows how to speak." It had been a week since the confrontation at Rosebridge Clinic. Aurora hadn't apologized, hadn't cried, but she did something Malika had never witnessed before. She stayed silent and let others decide. Eliza began the experimental treatment, new doctors, new facility, introduced by Trevor, accompanied by Malika. No lawyers, no stamped orders reading maintain damage stability. And today, as the first brush of light touched Eliza, even if only a faint orange blur, everything inside the mansion changed. The air wasn't tight anymore. Staff began to chat again. Windows stayed open all morning. Sunlight, ginger tea, and rosemary mingled in the halls, like something long suppressed had finally exhaled. Malika understood. Sometimes healing doesn't require the best doctor. It requires someone willing to break the lie called stability. Zion had returned, but this time not just to visit his sister. He had been invited to perform at a benefit concert, organized by Trevor, to raise funds for treatment programs for blind children across the country. Zion wore a navy shirt, hair neatly braided, his slender fingers sweeping across piano keys like a wind that could speak. As music filled the Quinn Estate's grand hall, once a fortress of cold power, the crowd stood still. Eliza sat near the piano. She couldn't see him, but she listened with every cell. She lifted her chin, tilted her head, and smiled. "I can feel the music flying. It's silver, like wind with feathers." Malika stood behind her, one hand resting gently on Eliza's shoulder. Zion said nothing after the performance, but when he looked at Malika, he nodded. No words needed. He knew. His sister had done what no one else dared, stepped inside the system not to burn it down, but to change it from within. That evening, after a light dinner, Aurora invited Malika into the study, the same room where she once ruled, issued orders, controlled every move. But this time, there were no commands, only a neatly clipped file on the table. "This is a proposal to restructure the Quinn Light Foundation," Aurora said. "I want you to lead our community outreach division." Malika looked at the file but didn't reach for it. "Why me?" Aurora exhaled, for the first time no trace of CEO in her voice. "Because you saw my daughter, when all I saw was deficiency." Malika remained silent. Aurora continued, "I used to believe power was control, but you taught me. Sometimes power is the courage to let someone walk alone." Then she looked Malika straight in the eye. No flinching. "I don't want you to do it for me. Do it for Eliza and for the children like her, the ones who never got a choice." Malika looked down at her own hands. She hadn't come here to be handed anything. But maybe it was time for the people once pushed away from the table to start deciding what gets served on it. Malika held the Quinn Light restructuring proposal for 3 days, but she didn't sign, not because she lacked belief in herself, but because she knew what it meant to watch a system use opportunity as a disguised tool for control. During those days, she still took Eliza to treatment, and every day the little girl asked something new. "If one day I can see, do you think I'd ever wish I'd stayed blind?" Every time it made Malika stop. She never answered immediately. Instead, she led Eliza out into the garden, let her hands brush against leaves, feel wind on her skin, listen to sparrows beating their wings. Then Malika would say, "You never lived in darkness. You lived with meaning, even when darkness was there." Eliza would nod and smile again. No light shines brighter than the smile of someone beginning to forgive a past they never chose. One morning, Aurora broke the silence. She came to Malika's room unannounced. No assistant, no clipboard, just herself. She wasn't wearing a jacket, no projections, just holding a folder, But this time, not another policy brief. It was the accident report from 5 years ago. She placed it on the desk. Her fingers trembled. I need you to read this, and if Eliza ever asks, tell her what happened, in a way a child can understand. Malika sat still for a long time. Why are you giving me this? She asked. Aurora answered without looking up. Because I don't believe I'll be forgiven, but I want her to have the right to choose the truth. In that moment, Malika no longer saw a frozen CEO. She saw a mother, bare, exhausted, and finally brave enough to face herself. That evening, Eliza lay in bed, head resting on a brown pillow, braille book in her hand. Still closed. Malika sat beside her, gently placing the folder on the nightstand. Unopened. I have a story, she said softly. About a mother, an accident, and a secret. Eliza didn't ask who the mother was, or who the child was. She just nodded. I'm ready. Malika didn't tell everything. She painted just enough with words. There was a car, a message that never got sent, a faint light, then a long darkness, and a person who wandered so deep into guilt, they forgot how to speak. After the story, Eliza asked just one question. Did the mother ever say sorry? Malika held her hand. I think she's still learning how. The next morning, Malika walked into the study. The Quinn Light Foundation proposal still sat there, the corner of the page curled slightly from the open window's breeze. She signed her name, but before she did, she added a handwritten note at the bottom of the strategic section. Real change doesn't come from budget lines. It comes from who's allowed to speak. As Malika stepped out, Aurora was sitting in the hallway, teacup in hand. No words were exchanged, but when their eyes met, a transfer of power, silent but irreversible, passed between them. Power was no longer in the hands of those who paid the wages. It was in the hands of those who knew how to turn pain into rebuilding. And Malika, a woman once fired from a coffee shop for helping a blind girl, was now rewriting the policies of an empire that had silenced hundreds of children just like her. Sometimes, to protect the truth, you must sacrifice the peace it will destroy. The message came in at 2:43 a.m. No sender, no subject line, just one sentence, followed by an encrypted attachment. You think Aurora Quinn has lost everything? Malika opened it on her private computer in the third-floor office of the Quinn estate. She had learned not to be easily shocked, but this time a chill raced down her spine, as if someone was watching her. Not just through walls, but through her skin. The file was a contract, signed by a name Malika had never seen before, but wasn't surprised by Carter Kingston, Kingston Global Ventures, majority stakeholder of Sterling Enterprises. And beneath that, Aurora Quinn's signature, dated just 1 week after the accident, 1 week after Eliza lost her sight. Malika sat up straight. The storm hadn't passed. It had just changed direction. The Quinn mansion was quiet in the early morning. Eliza was still asleep. Aurora had left at 5 a.m. for a private meeting with her advisors. Trevor was attending a foundation board session. No one realized that the house was drifting back toward a familiar darkness, one where power and reputation weren't destroyed, only handed over to those who knew how to hide them better. Malika sat in the library. The sun hadn't risen enough to chase away the shadows on the floor. She held the freshly printed documents, and with them, the weight of names once assumed to stand for justice. Carter Kingston, the man behind Sterling, the same corporation accused of manipulating healthcare systems and sued for denying treatment access to thousands of low-income patients. And now his name appeared alongside Aurora's in the parent company, Kingston Global Ventures, which currently held controlling shares in the Quinn Light Foundation. The new power Aurora had claimed to pass on to Malika had never belonged to her in the first place. Carter Kingston, a name rarely found in headlines, but ever present behind vanishing decisions made in a single call. A Cayman-born investor, he owned a web of shell companies spanning from the Bahamas to Luxembourg. To the public, he was a private philanthropist, but to insiders, he was the man who would buy an entire hospital, just to shut down the neurology wing that didn't make enough profit. Trevor had once mentioned him, just once, on a rare night of whiskey and honesty. That man made Aurora stay silent, not for money, but because he knows what she's hiding. Back then, Malika didn't understand. Now she did. Aurora had never been the queen. She was just a piece on the board. The king had always stayed in the shadows, which meant Eliza, Malika, the entire Quinn Light Foundation, were nothing but pieces on a game board still being played. Malika called Trevor. No answer. She didn't wait. She headed straight to the foundation office. When she walked in, Aurora was standing beside the strategy screen, Carter Kingston's name tucked discreetly inside the capital structure section. "Aurora," Malika said directly, "you've never controlled this foundation. Not once." Aurora turned. Her eyes were sunken, sleepless. A brief pause. Then a sigh. "You found it." Malika threw the file on the table. "You signed a contract with Carter Kingston 1 week after Eliza's accident. You didn't delay her treatment because the research wasn't ready. You delayed it because Sterling Enterprises held shares in the old hospital, and they refused to fund the new protocol." "It wasn't because I didn't want to treat my daughter," Aurora whispered. "It's because I was forced to stay silent, or lose everything." Malika stared at her. "And in the meantime, you let Eliza lose her light. You let thousands of other children believe that stable was the best they'd ever be allowed." Aurora said nothing. She just lowered her head, like someone who'd just realized. Some falls don't come from betrayal. They come from choosing silence too long. Aurora stood frozen in front of the screen, the ownership charts, the capital flows, the nested companies, all stretched like a spider web, a maze she once believed she controlled, now just proof of years of quiet submission. "You could revoke the shares," Malika said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a scalpel. "Or you can keep pretending to lead, while Carter decides everything, even who gets to see the light." Aurora let out a bitter laugh. "Revoke shares? Do you know what that would trigger?" "Yes." Malika's eyes didn't flinch. "A financial audit, a chain of lawsuits, maybe even prosecution." "Not just me," Aurora said. "Trevor signed the restructure last year. You think he'll walk away clean?" Malika didn't blink. "No one walks away clean, but one of us can't afford to stay silent another day." Aurora went still. For the first time, her eyes didn't show fear of loss. They showed fear of missing the chance to make it right, for the daughter she'd abandoned in the dark. At that same moment, a shareholders' meeting for the Quinn Light Foundation was underway in the Grand Hall. Carter Kingston's name didn't appear on any list, but seat number 1 was left empty. Everyone knew one call from him could reroute the entire budget. Malika entered the room in a simple white shirt and black trousers. No power, no shares, but she carried the truth. As the host began reviewing the annual financials, Malika raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said. "I have a public addition to the record." She stepped to the podium, raised a signed copy of the contract between Quinn Global Holdings and Kingston Ventures, and projected it onto the screen. The room went dead silent. "While you've been donating to support blind children," she began, "a portion of your funds have been routed into accounts linked to Carter Kingston, a man previously accused of manipulating pharmaceutical markets and vetoing care for low-income patients." One board member stood. "You have no authority to speak here." Malika looked him in the eye. "Number, but I have proof, and more than proof. I have something you left behind years ago. Courage." At the back of the hall, the door opened. Aurora entered. No assistants, no cameras, no lapel mic. She walked up to the stage, faced Malika, then turned to the crowd. Shareholders, investors, journalists, the same faces that once bowed to her power. "She's telling the truth," Aurora said, her voice steady. "I signed the contract with Carter Kingston. I let him run things from the shadows because I was scared. Scared of the truth about the accident, about Eliza, about myself. I chose silence, and the price I paid was 5 years of darkness for my daughter." Gasps rippled through the room. Aurora continued, "But as of this moment, Quinn Light will be fully independent. My shares will be transferred to the Public Education and Health Board, and I resign." Malika stood still. She hadn't expected the final blow to come from the one who'd hidden everything. But she knew. This wasn't forgiveness. It was Aurora's first time stepping into the light, not as a CEO, but as a mother accepting the weight of her choices. After the meeting, no one saw Aurora again. Rumors said she'd left the city, closed all her accounts, vanished from the press. But days later, in Malika's inbox, a handwritten envelope arrived. No letter, just a key to the fourth-floor office at the Quinn Light headquarters, and a small folded note in slanted script: "Write a new story." Not with slogans, but by listening to those who were never allowed to speak. A. Malika held the note tight, stood before the building. Behind her, Zion. Ahead of her, Eliza, holding hands with another blind girl, guiding her friend to sense the color of the sky through the scent of wind and birdsong. Light doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be true. And this time, the light wasn't coming from above. It was rising from someone who once stood at the bottom. Now stepping forward, not for revenge, but to redesign power itself. "I don't need a legacy award. I need a successor who knows how to dismantle the system." The words weren't spoken at a board meeting. They came from a handwritten letter. At the bottom, Aurora Quinn's signature. Malika read it at 5 a.m., before the sun had reached the windows. On the table lay a folder, full executive control of the Quinn Light Foundation, signed by Aurora, notarized by a lawyer, and attached to an unreleased portfolio of social justice initiatives. A crossed-out signature from a woman once seen as power incarnate, now turned into a roadmap. But Malika knew this wasn't just a transfer of title. It was a silent revolution, one that started the moment someone with power chose to give it up. That morning, the Quinn Light Foundation held a public announcement at the Chicago Arts Center, a glass building pressed against the winter sky, filled with people the old system once deemed unprofitable. The blind, the poor, the black, the overlooked. Those denied opportunity because of their origin. On stage sat one empty chair, not for Aurora, for the children who never got to speak because no one had ever listened. Zion, in a muted gray suit, sat at the piano. The band was setting up for a prelude. Eliza was there too, amber glasses on, radiant, holding the research notes she wrote herself. Her first public presentation on navigating space through sound and scent. None of the big names showed up. No Carter, no Sterling, no one from the old guard. Only one spirit stepped into the light, slowly but irreversibly. That day, the center of the press booth wasn't Malika or Trevor, it was Eliza. "What do you think about your mother hiding your treatment?" The voice came from a young reporter. His mic was cheap. Eliza paused. "I think some pain has no name. That doesn't mean it's not real." "Do you forgive her?" She smiled softly. "It's not my job to forgive. It's my job to live in a way that doesn't repeat her mistake." She walked back to the piano, a piece written for someone who never saw the light but could feel its rhythm through every strike of a key. At that exact moment, on the top floor of the building, Carter Kingston watched through one-way glass, his arms crossed, his eyes cold. The man who had once bought control now watching his so-called legacy slip through his fingers. Meanwhile, in a basement-level meeting room, Trevor laid a file on the table. This is a duplicate of the Kingston Global Sterling Quintech contract, signed by Carter, verified by Aurora. But the real value is in the fine print. The entire fund for experimental treatment was frozen 3 years ago. Malika read each line. Meaning? Trevor made it plain. Meaning Carter Kingston never lost control. As of now, he still oversees every funding pipeline for public care, including the center you're running. And Aurora? Trevor exhaled. She's cut ties, but I think only from the press. Malika stood up. Her face didn't flinch. It wore the calm of someone long accustomed to surveillance. Then it's time, she said. Time to let Carter Kingston know if he bought the system with money, I'll burn it down with the truth. The first email went out at 11:07 a.m., not from an anonymous burner, from the official account of the Quinn Light Foundation, now under Malika's authority. Subject: Frozen funding breakdown, unpublished report. Attached: Trevor's copy of the contract, plus 3 handwritten notes identifying when the budget was suspended, who signed off, and where the money was siphoned. Malika didn't send it to the media. She sent it to former employees of Sterling Enterprises. People who'd been fired for asking questions. Researchers whose funding was pulled because their findings didn't match media strategy. 12 minutes later, the first post appeared on a specialized forum. Title: What happens when a CEO goes silent and a blind girl sees through truth? Malika didn't speak. She sat still. But from that moment, the snowball began to roll. 2 hours later, Carter Kingston's office received an official request from the Federal Audit Committee. Submit all transactions related to experimental treatment programs. Simultaneously, an open letter from Eliza was published on the Foundation's website. I didn't write this to accuse my mother. I wrote it to remind everyone. We can't bury wrongdoing under fear, and we cannot build healing on silence. Carter slammed his desk. He understood. The battle was no longer in the boardroom. It was in the public's heart, a place he didn't own shares in. That evening, Malika got a call from an unknown number, the voice on the line. What do you want? She answered slowly. I want nothing. I just won't let you rewrite the fate of these children with spreadsheets and statistics. 1 week later, Sterling announced its full withdrawal from public treatment systems. No explanation. Contracts were reopened. A frontline hospital in Detroit received its first grant package in 3 years. Aurora didn't appear at the press conference, but an internal memo arrived from Malika. Subject line: Thank you. Eliza continued her music studies. She taught other children how to map space through sound, rewrote textbooks in blind, accessible language. Trevor stepped down from the board, returned to teaching part-time. And Malika? She held no fancy title, but everyone knew if anyone dared question the money, the truth, or why a blind child still hadn't been treated, they'd go to the office on the 3rd floor, the one with the door that never closed. On the final day of the World Without Light exhibition, Eliza stood in a dark room, hand resting on a bronze model of the galaxy. She smiled, turned toward Zion, who was playing the closing piece from the day of the launch. I don't need to see it all. I just need to know no one's covering my eyes anymore. Malika stood behind her. She didn't step forward. She knew. A leader isn't the one out front. She's the one who clears the path and exits when it's time. This time, the system wasn't toppled by protest or lawsuits. It fell to something simpler. A girl who spoke and a woman who refused to be silent. Sometimes the system doesn't need another opponent. It needs someone who can look it dead in the eye and say, I see you, and I'm not looking away. Malika isn't a superhero. Eliza has no powers, but they have something far too many have been denied: the right to speak and the strength to hold on to their voice. In a world where silence is rewarded, where Black women are called too harsh, too loud, too much, they chose not to please. They chose to rewrite the rules. You may not have a seat at the table. You may not have their last name. You may not have a mic or a spotlight. But if you have memory, a straight spine, and a reason not to bow, you have enough to make the system listen. They built cages out of silence. We break them with truth. And like Eliza said, I don't need to see it all. I just need to know. No one's covering my eyes anymore. If you understand that, then you, yes, you, are the rightful heir.